welcome to our new tips and tricks video, cycling across the USA. We're recording this video about 1 week after we left the US, and currently we are in Baja California in Mexico.
Alright, we're going to divide this video up into 3 topics. The first one being cycling, the second one being camping and accommodation, and the last one being general tips for you when you're cycling across the US. We're going to use a little cheat sheet here because we do have quite a lot of tips to remember. Alright, let's start with cycling. So the first thing might be a bit obvious, but check the state laws for cycling. Each state has slightly different laws. For example, that cars have to maintain a minimum of 3 feet when overtaking you, etc., etc. The important thing is here that, for example, some laws allow cyclists to use the full lane and even allow 2 cyclists to cycle 2 abreast, so side by side. And even though this may be legal in many states, in our experience, you do get some really, really aggressive drivers in the US, even though most are okay. But those that are really aggressive, they will cut you to the point where if you slightly swerve with your bicycle, you're going to get killed. So what we're trying to say is, even though the law may be on your side, don't provoke the situation, and if the road is a bit narrower, there's no shoulder, for example, then just ride behind each other and don't get yourself in dangerous situations where you might actually get injured or killed. Alright, next point. In some states, you're allowed to legally cycle on the interstate. Now, this might not sound very fun, but it is actually necessary, as in some states, especially for the West, which are mostly also the states where you are allowed to cycle on the interstate, you often don't have a choice. There are literally no other roads which you can take, and you have to take the interstate for a little bit. But it usually has a good shoulder, and we only had to do it for 2 times, I think, for 40 or 50 kilometers, so it really wasn't too bad. That being said, many roads and normal highways have really good shoulders, but some also don't have shoulders, or the shoulders are in rough shape with a lot of debris on them, so make sure you have good tires for cycling across the US. Alright, then be very mindful of crazy weather. In our 3 months cycling across the US in winter from December to March, we had 2.5 snowstorms, one being pretty extreme. We've had crazy wind with gusts up to 80 or 90 kilometers per hour, which is dangerous to the point where it'll blow you off the road and you cannot hold your bike anymore. Then dust storms and hailstorms, thunderstorms, so definitely be really, really mindful of the weather. Check the forecast well ahead. Don't take any too big risks. So seek shelter if something bad is meant to come, is forecast. And we've even cycling in the south of the US in winter, we had temperatures of around minus 15 Celsius that we cycled in, and that we camped in, I think, minus 8 Celsius, something like that. So it was pretty crazy. For the north, of course, it gets even colder, and in summer it can get really, really hot as well. So just be prepared for the conditions you're going to be cycling in. Then get some good music, podcasts, audiobooks for cycling those really long straight roads in the west of the US. You really need some good music when you know you're going to be going straight for the next 100 kilometers or something like that. Then for water, we never really had any problems getting water in the US. Further east, there are lots of pavilions also where you can rest and cook, for example, take a lunch break, and they also have toilets and clean toilets and water to fill up. And then further west, you have these rest areas which also have toilets and water to fill up, and usually there's always a gas station or something. We never had to go more than 2 full days without water, if even that. And these rest areas and pavilions probably as well also really can be used for camping illegally, but can be used for camping, but Louisa will get to that later. And last but not least, we like our coffee. It was very hard to find good coffee in the US. I don't think we had one single coffee, not at a person's, excluding at a person's home, that was not in a plastic cup, unfortunately. But the coffee at petrol stations isn't too bad. It's drip filter coffee, but you get a big coffee for like $1, which is not too bad.
And enough for the both of us. Alright, I'm gonna continue with camping and accommodations. Wild camping in the east of the US isn't very easy just because there's almost no public land. Most of it is private property. And we were a bit more careful with private property than we were in Europe, where we basically camped everywhere. But here, well, not here, but in the US, there's most of the private property fenced in, and we just knew that Americans can be a bit more on edge with their private land, so we were careful with that and often decided to stay in town parks, which is also not legal, which is why we stealth camped most of the time in town parks, which means we set up our tent when it was dark, and we also left the park when it was dark, still in the morning. Most of the time that wasn't a problem. Many people that saw us just talked to us, some just asked us, are you gonna camp here? And that was alright for them. One man even invited us into his home, which was really nice. But some other people called the police seeing us in the park in the night, and then the police stopped by. In the end they let us sleep there, but yeah, you just never know how people react. So if you want to be sure, just ask at the police station before you camp in a town park. Just be aware that they might say no, and then you have to find a place to sleep. So yeah, we thought we rather ask for forgiveness than for permission. Wild camping out west gets a bit easier because there's more public land, and because we learned about an app that's called Free Roam. There you can find public land either from the Bureau of Land Management, so BLM land, or USFS land, so the Forest Service land. There are some regulations, you should check them out beforehand, but yeah, we were able to wild camp on the public land, and it was usually great. If you do wild camping, then watch out for wild animals. Depending on the region where you are in the US, you can have alligators, bears, snakes, and raccoons, and yeah, just make sure where you are to check out if you should be careful. Many people actually told us that the hawks in all of the US would be very vicious, but we didn't have any encounters with hawks. So.
With a live hawk, we saw lots of dead ones.
We saw, we did. But yeah, we didn't have any problems. One time a raccoon stole some of our food, but that was basically it. If we didn't wild camp, we, especially towards the end, stayed in some churches. We just either showed up there and asked if we could sleep inside the church or next to it, or we contacted them beforehand on Facebook or just called them when we saw on Google Maps there would be a church. It obviously doesn't work out every time, but many times the people were very friendly and told us we could sleep in the church or in the educational building next by.
Got some food.
Yeah, food, and sometimes there was even a shower.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, it was really great. Saved us from some very cold nights, and yeah, sometimes the churches aren't even on Google Maps, so you might get to a junction or a very small town and there is a church, and just ask there, especially in the small places where there's nothing else. You have good chances that they will take you in. And actually 39 nights in the US we stayed with hosts. We're using warm showers and couch surfing. And over those two apps, yeah, we found, especially in Florida or in the east, many hosts we had to find them because there was nowhere else to camp, as I mentioned. But also further west, there are hosts basically everywhere along the route, and it's just great, not only because it's free accommodation, but especially because you get to know the country, you get to know so many people and so many different people. We really enjoyed our time with all these hosts.
Alright, and last but not least, some general tips. So as Louise already mentioned, we stayed with a lot of hosts in the US, and we were actually just blown away by how nice and welcoming and helpful people were. Not just our hosts, but pretty much anyone we ran into. We didn't really know what to expect when we came to the US, but this is definitely pretty much the biggest thing that blew us away. Then the next general tip: cost of living in the US is really, really high. From accommodation, motels, to paid camping in state parks, for example, but also to food, to entrance fees for attractions, but also for state parks or trails even. Everything is pretty damn expensive, especially compared to what we were used to Europe. For example, for camping, if you're going to a state park to camp on a, for example, primitive campsite, meaning you have most of the time nothing, not even toilets, just your or big sanitary areas, just literally a spot of land to camp on, you are sometimes paying $20 to $30 a night just for a little piece of land. And if we had done this every night, we would have been broke halfway along, pretty much. So definitely be really mindful of that. Especially with motels. Motels are pretty expensive. The cheapest tend to be $60 to $80 a night. This was true for the whole US, not just for a certain region. And what you get for that price is nothing compared to what you get for that kind of money in Europe. If you're getting a motel for $60 to $80 a night, definitely check the room or let them show you the room before you pay, and make sure they have Wi-Fi and so on, because sometimes we've had really, really bad places and we're just stunned how they were so expensive. In general, the better the name of a motel, the worse the place. So if it's like a deluxe inn or a superior inn, then it's going to be a bad place most of the time. But also food, when you're going shopping, can be pretty expensive, especially if you want some better food and not just processed, packaged things. You do get cheap things like beans, whatever, at Dollar General, Walmart, Family Dollar, but the quality isn't always the best. And our last general tip for you, we wanted to talk about the border crossing from San Diego to Tijuana, from US to Mexico, because this is something that people had warned us about weeks or even months in advance to us getting to this border crossing. So everybody said this was a really dangerous crossing and that we should avoid it if we could. And to be honest, we did not experience that at all. We're not saying that this is not a dangerous crossing, but in our experience was pretty different. So we tried to use the pedestrian Ped East crossing from San Diego to Tijuana, and when we got there, it seemed just like any normal border crossing. The interstate is right next to it, which you're not allowed to use as a cyclist though. But it seemed totally fine. The reason we didn't actually end up using this crossing is because there are these big turnstiles, I think they're called, like these metal gates, which are fine for pedestrians and just like road bikes, for example, but with all our luggage, it wasn't that easy, especially with my long bike with the guitar on the back, to get our bikes through. So we actually ended up cycling 15 kilometers further east to, what was it called?
Otay Mesa.
To another border crossing, which is just a normal road, and that was completely fine. But like we said, even the one, the Ped East crossing from San Diego to Tijuana seemed like just any other border crossing, like in Europe, for example. So, maybe it is a dangerous crossing, but we can't confirm that.
And this is already the end of this video. Thank you for watching, and we hope you could take some tips for the road with you. And if you do have some more questions for us, just comment them below and we'll try to answer them.